I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd destroy a wedding. But when my daughter-in-law slapped me across the face in front of 200 guests and demanded I hand over my apartment keys, the keys to the home I'd worked 37 years to own, something inside me snapped like a brittle twig. My name is Dorothy, I'm 71 years old, and I'm about to tell you the story of how one phone call turned a perfect spring wedding into absolute chaos. But before I do, I need to know, where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and tell me your city, your state, your country. Because what happened to me, it could happen to anyone, anywhere. And if you've ever been betrayed by family, if you've ever had someone try to take what's rightfully yours, then you're going to want to stick around for this entire story. Hit that subscribe button right now, because you're about to hear something that'll make your blood boil and your heart race. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why. Let me take you back to where this all began. It was March of 2023, and my son Trevor was getting married to a woman named Cassidy Walsh. Now, I want you to understand something about Cassidy from the very beginning. She wasn't evil, at least not at first glance. She was 28, blonde, came from money in Connecticut, and had this way of smiling that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. The kind of woman who could charm a snake out of its skin. I should have seen the warning signs. God knows they were there, flashing like neon lights in Times Square. But when your only child is happy, when you see him smile for the first time in years after his messy divorce from his first wife, you want to believe. You want to trust. You want to think that maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. Trevor was 34 then, a good man who worked as an electrical engineer for the city of Portland, Oregon. That's where we lived, Portland. I'd raised him there as a single mother after his father walked out when Trevor was just 8 years old. 37 years I'd worked multiple jobs, scraping and saving, first as a hotel housekeeper, then as a school secretary, finally as an office manager at a dental practice. 37 years of 60-hour weeks, skipped meals, and second-hand clothes so I could put that boy through college and help him become the man I knew he could be. The apartment, oh, the apartment. A beautiful two-bedroom place in the Pearl District, 1,200 square feet of hardwood floors and big windows overlooking the Willamette River. I'd bought it in 1998 for $110,000, every penny of it earned through sweat and sacrifice. By 2023, that same apartment was worth $450,000. It was my retirement, my security, my legacy. The one thing I could leave to Trevor when I was gone. Cassidy had moved in with Trevor 6 months after they started dating. I remember the first time she came to my apartment for dinner. She walked around like she was appraising everything, touching my grandmother's china, commenting on how cozy everything was. That word, cozy. In her mouth, it sounded like an insult wrapped in velvet. But Trevor was smitten. Absolutely head over heels, can't think straight smitten. He'd bring her to family dinners, and she'd sit there picking at her food, making little comments about how the neighborhood was up and coming, but needed the right kind of development. How my apartment had so much potential if someone just had the vision to modernize it. The first real red flag came during Christmas of 2022. We were at my place, just the three of us, opening gifts. I'd gotten Cassidy a beautiful cashmere scarf from Nordstrom, something I really couldn't afford but wanted to show her I accepted her as part of our family. She opened it, smiled that perfect smile, and said, "Oh, Dorothy, this is lovely. You know, when Trevor and I get married, we're going to need so much more space than his little apartment. Have you ever thought about downsizing? There are some lovely senior communities in Beaverton." Senior communities. I was 69 years old, healthy as a horse, still working part-time at the dental office because I wanted to, not because I had to. And this woman, this girl who'd been in our lives for 8 months, was already planning to ship me off to some retirement home so she could get her hands on my property. Trevor didn't say a word. Just sat there like a deer in headlights, caught between the woman he loved and the mother who'd sacrificed everything for him. That's when I knew I was in trouble. That's when I should have started making my own plans. But instead, I smiled and said something about how I wasn't ready to slow down yet. How I loved my apartment, my neighborhood, my independence. Cassidy's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. Something that made my skin crawl. The engagement came in February. Trevor took her to Multnomah Falls, the same place I'd taken him for picnics when he was little. He proposed on the bridge with my grandmother's ring, the one I'd given him when they started talking about marriage. A beautiful Art Deco piece from the 1920s, worth about $8,000. She said yes, of course. Posted about it on social media before they even got back to the car. My prince found me, she wrote. Time to start building our empire. Empire. That word stuck with me. Empires are built on conquered territory, aren't they? The wedding planning started immediately. Cassidy wanted everything perfect, everything expensive. The venue alone cost $15,000, some historic mansion in the West Hills with gardens and a view of Mount Hood. The dress was $4,000. The flowers were $3,000. The photographer was another $3,000. And who do you think was expected to contribute? Trevor made decent money, but not that kind of money. Cassidy's parents offered to pay for half, but that still left a $20,000 gap that somehow became my responsibility. My life savings, my retirement fund, slowly drained to pay for a wedding that felt more like a business transaction than a celebration of love. But I paid it. Because Trevor asked me to. Because I thought maybe if I showed Cassidy how much I supported their marriage, she'd stop looking at my apartment like it was already hers. I was such a fool. The harassment started small. Little comments about how I was rattling around in such a big place. How property taxes in the Pearl District were astronomical, and wouldn't it be smarter to liquidate and invest in something more practical? How Trevor and Cassidy had been looking at houses in Lake Oswego, but they needed a larger down payment to get into the neighborhood they wanted. Then came the more direct approaches. Cassidy would show up at my apartment unannounced, usually when Trevor was at work. She'd bring coffee and pastries, sit at my kitchen table, and talk about her plans. How she and Trevor wanted to start a family right away. How children needed space to grow, good schools, safe neighborhoods. How my apartment would be perfect for a young family just starting out. You could move closer to us, she'd say, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. There's a beautiful assisted living facility in Lake Oswego. You'd have your own little studio, activities planned for you, meals provided. No more worrying about maintenance or property taxes or any of that stressful homeowner stuff. I'd listen politely and change the subject, but inside I was screaming. This was my home. My sanctuary. The place where I'd raised my son, where I'd fought off loneliness and poverty and despair. The walls held memories of birthday parties and homework sessions and quiet evenings reading books. The kitchen smelled like 40 years of family dinners. The bedroom window caught the morning light exactly right, and I'd wake up every day to the sight of the river and the mountains beyond. But Cassidy couldn't see any of that. All she saw was dollar signs and square footage. 2 weeks before the wedding, she made her final offer. She came over on a Saturday morning while Trevor was playing golf with his friends. Dressed in yoga pants and a designer top that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. She had a folder with her, actual paperwork. Dorothy, she said, settling into my favorite chair like she owned the place, I've been thinking about your situation. About our situation. And I think I have the perfect solution. She opened the folder and pulled out a real estate listing. A one-bedroom apartment in a senior community in Tigard. 700 square feet, community dining room, scheduled activities, on-site medical care. It's perfect for you, she said, her voice bright with false enthusiasm. And the best part is, the monthly fees are only $1,800. Very reasonable. $1,800. My mortgage payment was $650. Now, I know what you're thinking, Cassidy continued before I could say anything. How can you afford $1,800 a month? Well, that's where this gets exciting. Trevor and I have been talking to a financial advisor, and we think the smartest thing would be for you to sell this place and invest the proceeds. With $450,000 properly invested, you could easily generate the income you need for the senior community, plus have money left over for travel, hobbies, whatever makes you happy. She was talking about my life like it was a math problem to be solved. And here's the really wonderful part, she said, leaning forward like she was sharing a delicious secret. Trevor and I could buy the apartment from you directly. No real estate agents, no commissions, no hassle. We'd handle everything. You could move into your new place right after the wedding, start fresh in your golden years. Golden years. As if being forced out of my home by my son's wife was some kind of gift. I looked at her sitting there in my chair, in my living room, with her perfectly styled hair and her perfect smile, planning out my future like I was some kind of problem to be managed. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years, pure, white-hot rage. But I didn't let it show. Instead, I smiled and told her I'd think about it. That it was a big decision and I needed time to consider all the options. Her smile faltered just a little. Of course, she said, gathering up her papers. But Dorothy, I hope you understand how generous this offer is. Trevor and we're trying to help you. We're trying to make this transition as smooth as possible for everyone. Transition. Like I was a business being sold off. After she left, I sat in my living room for hours, staring out at the river, thinking about everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built. And I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going anywhere. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of final preparations and mounting tension. I could feel Cassidy's impatience growing like a tumor. She'd call me daily, sometimes twice, always with some new reason why I should reconsider her generous offer. The market was softening, she'd say. Interest rates were rising. The senior community had a waiting list, and this opportunity might not come again. But I held firm. And with each passing day, her mask slipped a little more. Trevor started avoiding me. My own son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, couldn't look me in the eye. When I called him to talk about what was happening, he'd give me these short, clipped responses. Mom, Cassidy's just trying to help, he'd say. She's worried about you living alone in such a big place. We all are. We all are. As if I was some fragile old woman who couldn't take care of herself. Trevor, I'd say, I don't need help. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own life, my own home. But Mom, think about the future. What happens when you can't handle the stairs anymore? What happens if you fall and no one's around? Cassidy's thought this through. She's smart about these things. Cassidy's smart about these things. My son was talking about my life like I wasn't even part of the conversation. The night before the wedding, we had the rehearsal dinner at some trendy restaurant in the Pearl District, ironically, just 6 blocks from my apartment. Cassidy had chosen the location, she said, because it was convenient for Dorothy. Everything she did came with these little poison compliments, these careful words that sounded thoughtful but felt like tiny cuts. I wore my best dress, navy blue with small silver beading that I'd bought for Trevor's college graduation 15 years earlier. It still fit perfectly, and I'd had my hair done that afternoon at the salon. I wanted to look my best, to show everyone that I wasn't the decrepit old woman Cassidy painted me as. But the moment I walked into that restaurant, I could feel the eyes on me. Cassidy's family, her friends, even some of Trevor's buddies I'd known for years, they all looked at me with this mixture of pity and awkwardness. Like I was the crazy old aunt nobody wanted to deal with but couldn't quite ignore. Cassidy's mother, Patricia Walsh, a perfectly preserved 55-year-old who'd clearly had work done, cornered me near the bar. "Dorothy," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "Cassidy tells me you're thinking about making some changes to your living situation. How exciting. A fresh start at your age, so brave. So brave. Like moving into a nursing home was an adventure instead of a defeat." "I'm quite happy where I am," I said, keeping my voice level. Patricia's smile tightened. "Of course you are, dear. But you know, Cassidy and Trevor are so young, so full of dreams. Starting a marriage in that cramped little apartment of his, well, it's just not ideal for building a family, is it?" Cramped little apartment. Trevor's place was over 1,000 square feet. "They seem to be managing just fine," I said. "For now," Patricia said, her tone suggesting that disaster was just around the corner. "But Cassidy's used to space, to comfort. She grew up in a 5,000 square foot house in Greenwich. This whole, urban lifestyle, it's quite an adjustment for her." I wanted to ask why her precious daughter had chosen to move to Portland if she found it so inadequate. I wanted to point out that maybe someone, used to space and comfort, should have thought about that before committing to marry a city employee who lived in Oregon. But I bit my tongue. "I'm sure they'll figure it out," I said and walked away. The evening got worse from there. During the toasts, Cassidy's father, Richard Walsh, stood up with his champagne glass and made a speech about how proud he was to welcome Trevor into their family. How excited they were to see the young couple build their empire in Portland. How generous the community had been in supporting their new beginning. Generous community. He was talking about me. About my money, my sacrifice, as if it was some kind of charitable donation instead of a mother supporting her son's happiness. But the real blow came when Trevor stood up for his toast. My son, my beautiful boy, looked out at the room full of people and talked about how grateful he was for everyone's support. How he couldn't wait to start this new chapter with Cassidy. "And Mom," he said, finally looking at me, "thank you for everything. I know this transition isn't easy, but I want you to know how much it means to Cassidy and me that you're willing to make these changes to help us start our life together." Transition. Changes. Willing. He was talking like I'd already agreed to give up my home. Like it was a done deal. The room broke into applause, and I felt my face burn with humiliation. People were congratulating me for my sacrifice, patting my hand and telling me how generous I was being. How lucky Trevor was to have such a selfless mother. I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to tell them all that I hadn't agreed to anything, that I was being pushed out of my own life by a woman who'd been in our family for less than 2 years. But instead, I smiled and nodded and accepted their condescending praise like the good, compliant old woman they expected me to be. After dinner, as people were saying their goodbyes and making final plans for the wedding, Cassidy pulled me aside. She was glowing with happiness and champagne, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Dorothy," she said, grabbing my hands, "I just want you to know how much tonight meant to me. Hearing Trevor talk about our future, seeing how supportive everyone is, it's perfect. Everything's falling into place exactly as it should." She squeezed my hands tighter. "And tomorrow, after the ceremony, after all the chaos dies down, we'll sit down and finalize everything. The paperwork, the timeline, all of it. I've already talked to a moving company, and they can have you packed and relocated within 2 weeks. Isn't that wonderful? You'll be settled in your new place before summer really gets started. Moving company. Timeline. Finalized." She'd planned out my entire future without asking me a single question. "Cassidy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." Her eyes lit up. She thought I was about to thank her, to express my gratitude for her thoughtful planning. "I'm not selling my apartment," I said. "I'm not moving to Tigard or anywhere else. That's my home, and I'm staying. The change in her expression was instant and terrifying. The warm, loving daughter-in-law mask dropped completely, and for just a moment, I saw the real Cassidy Walsh. Cold, calculating, ruthless. "Dorothy," she said, her voice still sweet but with steel underneath, "I think you're confused. Trevor and I have already made arrangements. The senior community is expecting you. We've talked to contractors about renovating your apartment. This isn't a request anymore, it's happening." "No," I said, pulling my hands free from hers. "It's not." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, calculating, planning. "We'll see about that," she said finally. Then she smiled that perfect smile, kissed my cheek like nothing had happened, and walked away. I should have left then. I should have gone home, packed a bag, and disappeared until the whole thing was over. But I'd already paid for the wedding. I'd already bought my dress for the ceremony, already made arrangements to have my hair done in the morning. And despite everything, Trevor was still my son. I couldn't miss his wedding, no matter how much I despised his bride. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of my neighborhood, the late-night streetcar, the voices of young people walking home from the bars, the familiar settling sounds of my building. My building. My home. And I knew that tomorrow was going to change everything. I could feel it in my bones, the way you can feel a storm coming long before you see the clouds. I just had no idea how right I was. The morning of May 15th dawned perfect and cruel, all sunshine and cherry blossoms, the kind of Portland spring day that makes you believe in new beginnings. I woke up in my apartment overlooking the river, made my coffee in the kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of meals for my son, and tried to convince myself that I could get through this day with my dignity intact. I should have known better. My hair appointment was at 9, makeup at 11. I'd splurged on both because I wanted to look my absolute best. Not for Cassidy, not for her family with their barely concealed pity, but for me. For my own sense of self-worth. If I was going to be the villain in their story, the stubborn old woman standing in the way of true love, then I was going to be a beautiful villain. The salon was buzzing with wedding day energy. 3 other mothers of the bride or groom were getting their hair done, chattering excitedly about their children's big day. I listened to them talk about how proud they were, how excited they were to welcome new family members, how they couldn't wait to see their babies start their new lives. I said nothing. What could I say? That I was dreading my son's wedding? That his bride was trying to steal my home? That I felt more like a victim than a celebration guest? By 1 o'clock, I was ready. Navy blue dress with silver accessories, hair swept up in an elegant chignon, makeup subtle but perfect. I looked like what I was, a successful 71-year-old woman who'd worked hard for everything she had and wasn't about to give it up without a fight. The venue was even more spectacular than I'd imagined when we'd toured it months earlier. The historic Overlook House sat on 5 acres in the West Hills, with gardens that cascaded down toward the city and views that stretched from Mount Hood to the Coast Range. Cassidy had chosen well, it was the kind of place that made you feel like you were stepping into a fairy tale. 200 chairs were arranged in perfect rows facing an arbor covered in white roses and peonies. The guest list was equally divided, half Portland locals who knew Trevor from work or college, half East Coast elite who'd flown in for Cassidy's big day. The contrast was obvious and awkward. Trevor's friends wore their best suits from Men's Warehouse and looked uncomfortable in the fancy surroundings. Cassidy's crowd wore designer everything and moved through the space like they owned it. I found my seat in the front row, next to Trevor's best friend Marcus and his wife Jenny. They'd known me for 15 years, had eaten countless meals at my table, had borrowed money during tough times that I'd never asked them to repay. Today, they could barely look at me. "Dorothy," Jenny said awkwardly, "you look beautiful. How are you holding up?" Holding up. Like I was grieving instead of celebrating. "I'm fine," I said. Excited to see Trevor so happy. Marcus cleared his throat. Listen, Dorothy, what you're doing, helping them get started, making that sacrifice, it's really generous. Not every mother would be so understanding. There was that word again. Sacrifice. As if I'd volunteered to be a martyr instead of being pushed into it. I was saved from responding by the arrival of the wedding party. Trevor looked handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo, his dark hair still thick at 34, his smile nervous but genuine. For just a moment, looking at him, I remembered the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The teenager who brought me coffee in bed on Mother's Day. The young man who called me every Sunday no matter where his life took him. Where had that boy gone? When had he stopped protecting me and started needing protection from me? The bridesmaids came next, 4 women in dusty rose dresses that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. They glided down the aisle like they were walking a runway, all perfectly styled hair and professional smiles. And then came Cassidy. I have to give her credit, she was absolutely stunning. The dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and French lace, fitted through the bodice and flowing into a cathedral train that seemed to float behind her. Her hair was pinned in soft waves under a vintage veil, my grandmother's veil, actually, another family heirloom that I'd offered up for the wedding. She looked like a princess, like a movie star, like every little girl's dream of the perfect bride. The ceremony was beautiful and empty. The officiant talked about love and commitment and building a life together. Trevor and Cassidy exchanged vows they'd written themselves, full of promises about supporting each other's dreams and creating a home filled with laughter and children. Cassidy cried delicate tears that didn't disturb her makeup. Trevor's voice cracked with emotion. It should have been perfect. It would have been perfect, if I hadn't known what was lurking underneath all that white silk and romantic poetry. The reception was held in the same venue's ballroom, a grand space with crystal chandeliers and French doors that opened onto the garden. Cassidy had planned every detail obsessively, round tables for 8 with ivory linens and centerpieces of white hydrangeas and roses. A 12-piece band instead of a DJ. A menu that featured Pacific Northwest salmon and locally sourced vegetables prepared by a celebrity chef. My table was strategically placed, close enough to the head table to show that I was family, far enough away to minimize interaction. I was seated with Trevor's godfather and his wife, 2 couples from my neighborhood who'd known Trevor since he was small, and Cassidy's great-aunt, a 90-year-old woman who spent most of dinner asleep in her chair. The conversation was stilted and awkward. Everyone knew about the situation with my apartment, but nobody wanted to talk about it directly. Instead, they made vague comments about big changes, and new chapters, and exciting transitions. I smiled and nodded and drank more wine than I usually would, trying to numb the growing sense of dread in my chest. The speeches started after the main course. Trevor's best man told embarrassing stories from college. Cassidy's sister talked about her childhood dreams of the perfect wedding. Richard Walsh raised his glass to toast, the beginning of a beautiful empire. And then Trevor stood up. He looked out over the room full of people, his face flushed with happiness and champagne, and began to speak about his future. About the plans he and Cassidy had made. About the house they wanted to buy, the family they wanted to start, the life they were going to build together. We're so grateful to everyone who's made this day possible, he said. Especially my mom, who's always been there for me, who's always put my happiness before her own. He turned to look directly at me, and his smile was so warm, so genuine, that for a moment I forgot about everything else. Mom, I know this hasn't been easy for you. I know you've had to make some tough decisions lately. But I want you to know how much it means to me, to both of us, that you're willing to help us start our life together. Your generosity, your love, your willingness to put family first, that's the example you've always set, and it's the kind of person I hope to be. The room erupted in applause. People turned to smile at me, to nod approvingly, to raise their glasses in my direction. Trevor was still looking at me with such love, such gratitude, that I felt tears sting my eyes. He believed it. My son actually believed that I'd agreed to give up my home for his happiness. Cassidy had convinced him that I was on board, that I was a willing participant in their plan. That's when I realized the full scope of her manipulation. She hadn't just been working on me, she'd been working on Trevor too. Telling him that I'd come around, that I understood what was best for everyone, that I was excited about the move. She'd painted herself as the caring daughter-in-law who was helping to arrange a smooth transition for his aging mother. And Trevor, sweet, trusting Trevor, had believed every word. The applause died down, and Trevor sat back down, reaching over to squeeze Cassidy's hand. She beamed at him, then turned her gaze to me. Even from across the room, I could see the triumph in her eyes. She'd won, and she knew it. But the night wasn't over. As the evening progressed and the drinks flowed, Cassidy became bolder. She started making comments at the head table that were loud enough for nearby guests to hear. About how lucky I was to have such a caring daughter-in-law to help with the move. About how excited she was to help me settle into my new place. About how wonderful it would be for Trevor to have his childhood home to raise his own children in. Childhood home. She was talking about my apartment like it was already theirs. Other guests started approaching me with congratulations. Cassidy's college friends thanked me for being so selfless. Trevor's coworkers told me how smart I was being to downsize while I was still healthy enough to enjoy it. Even the band leader made a comment about how nice it was to see a family working together to support the young couple's dreams. With each comment, each well-meaning compliment, I felt the walls closing in around me. They all believed I'd agreed to this. They all thought I was willingly participating in my own displacement. By 10 o'clock, I was barely holding it together. The wine, the stress, the constant barrage of congratulations for a decision I'd never made, it was all too much. I needed air, space, time to think. I stepped out onto the garden terrace, hoping for a few minutes of quiet. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of roses, and the lights of Portland twinkled below like fallen stars. For just a moment, I felt peaceful. Then I heard voices behind me. Can't believe she's still being so difficult about this. It was Cassidy, talking to someone just inside the French doors. I mean, Richard offered her market value, no realtor fees, no hassle. What more does she want? Some old people just can't accept change, another voice replied. Patricia Walsh. My mother was the same way before we moved her to assisted living. Sometimes you have to be firm. Well, Trevor's finally on board, Cassidy continued. He talked to her last week about the timeline. She agreed to everything, the move, the sale, all of it. So I don't know why she's suddenly acting like this is news to her. Last week. Trevor had talked to me last week, but we'd never discussed any timeline. We'd never discussed me agreeing to anything. Maybe she's having memory issues, Patricia suggested. It happens at that age. Confusion, forgetting conversations. Memory issues. They were talking about me like I was suffering from dementia, like I was too mentally incompetent to remember my own decisions. That's what I'm worried about, Cassidy said, and her voice was full of fake concern. I mean, she's 71. Living alone in that big apartment, trying to manage everything herself, it's not safe. Trevor and I have been talking about getting her evaluated. Evaluated. They were talking about having me declared mentally incompetent. Well, once she's settled in the senior community, she'll have the support she needs, Patricia said. And you and Trevor can focus on your own lives without worrying about her. I stood there in the darkness, listening to my son's wife plan out my future like I was a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed. And suddenly, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't about helping me. This wasn't about concern for my safety or my well-being. This was about getting me out of the way so they could have what they wanted. My home, my life, my independence, all of it was just collateral damage in their pursuit of their perfect life. I walked back inside, my mind racing, my hands shaking with rage and adrenaline. The party was winding down, guests were starting to leave, but I barely noticed. I was focused on one thing now. I needed to talk to Trevor. I needed to set the record straight, once and for all. But as I approached the head table, looking for my son, Cassidy appeared in front of me like a beautiful, perfectly dressed roadblock. "Dorothy," she said, her voice bright with artificial warmth. "There you are. I was just looking for you." She grabbed my arm with both hands, her grip tighter than necessary. "I think it's time we had that conversation, don't you? About next steps, about the timeline we discussed. I know you're probably feeling a little overwhelmed with everything, but I want you to know how excited we are to help you with this transition." She was doing it again. Talking like I'd already agreed, like the conversation on the terrace had never happened. "Cassidy," I said, pulling my arm free, "I need to speak with Trevor." "Oh, he's busy right now, talking to his college friends. But you don't need to worry about Trevor, he and I are completely on the same page about everything. In fact, why don't we take care of this right now?" She reached into her small beaded purse and pulled out a set of keys. My keys. The spare set I'd given Trevor years ago for emergencies. "These are yours, aren't they?" she said, holding them up where everyone could see. "Trevor thought it would be easier if you just gave them to us tonight, you know, to make the transition smoother. That way we can start getting the apartment ready while you're packing up your personal things." My apartment keys. She was asking for my apartment keys. At her wedding reception. In front of 200 people. The conversations around us died down as people noticed what was happening. Guests turned to look, sensing drama, sensing conflict. Cassidy's smile never wavered, but her eyes were hard and cold. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Oh, Dorothy," she said, her voice full of patient condescension, "I know change is scary. But we've talked about this. You agreed to the timeline, remember? Trevor confirmed it with you just last week." She was gaslighting me. In front of everyone, she was trying to make me look confused, forgetful, possibly even mentally incompetent. "I never agreed to any timeline," I said, louder now. "I never agreed to sell my apartment or move anywhere." A murmur went through the nearby guests. This was not the gracious, cooperative mother of the groom they'd been expecting. Cassidy's mask started to slip. Just a little, just around the edges, but enough that I could see the calculation behind her perfect features. "Dorothy," she said, her voice still sweet but with an edge of warning, "let's not do this here. Let's not ruin Trevor's special day with confusion and misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. She was still trying to paint me as the confused old woman who couldn't keep her story straight. "There's no misunderstanding," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "I am not selling my apartment. I am not moving to assisted living. And I am certainly not giving you my keys." The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people staring at us, waiting to see what would happen next. I could see Trevor across the room, finally noticing the commotion, starting to move in our direction. Cassidy's perfect composure finally cracked. "You selfish, stubborn old woman," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? Do you have any idea how much you're hurting your son with this tantrum?" And then she did something that changed everything. She slapped me. Hard. Across the face. In front of 200 wedding guests. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. My cheek burned, my ears rang, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The silence was absolute, even the band had stopped playing. "Give me those keys," Cassidy said, her voice shaking with rage. "You're going to ruin everything with your selfishness. Give me the keys to that apartment right now. I touched my burning cheek, felt the sting of humiliation and rage, and looked into the face of my son's wife. This beautiful, terrible woman who had just shown everyone exactly who she really was. No, I said quietly. And then I walked out. I walked through that ballroom in complete silence. 200 people staring at me, mouths open, drinks frozen halfway to their lips. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was my heels clicking on the marble floor and the rustle of my dress as I made my way to the exit. Trevor was calling my name, trying to push through the crowd to reach me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If I'd stopped, if I'd looked back and seen the confusion and hurt in my son's eyes, I might have crumbled right there on the floor. The valet brought my car, my 15-year-old Honda Civic that looked pathetic next to all the BMWs and Mercedes in the parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The left side of my face was on fire where Cassidy had struck me, and I could feel tears starting to gather in my eyes. But I didn't cry. Not yet. I drove home to my apartment in the Pearl District, parked in my assigned space, and rode the elevator to the 4th floor. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it that morning, newspapers folded on the coffee table, coffee cup in the sink, the faint scent of the lilacs I'd picked from the building's garden lingering in the air. My home. My sanctuary. The place they wanted to take away from me. I poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey, good Irish whiskey that I'd been saving for special occasions, and sat down in my favorite chair by the window. The sun was setting over the river, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the city lights were starting to twinkle to life below. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was mine. And they thought they could just take it away from me. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Trevor, of course. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. And again. I turned it off. I needed to think. I needed to plan. Because what had just happened at that wedding reception wasn't the end of this story, it was the beginning of something much bigger. See, there's something I haven't told you about myself, something that Cassidy Walsh and her perfectly polished family didn't know when they decided to push around a lonely old widow. I wasn't always an office manager at a dental practice. Before Trevor was born, before I became a single mother scrambling to make ends meet, I had a different life. A different career. I was an investigator for the Oregon Department of Human Services. For 12 years, I tracked down deadbeat parents, investigated welfare fraud, and uncovered financial scams. I knew how to dig into people's lives, how to find information they didn't want found, how to follow paper trails and connect dots that other people missed. When Trevor's father walked out on us, I had to give up that job because it required too much travel, too many late nights. I took the office manager position because it was stable, because it had good benefits, because it would let me be the mother Trevor needed me to be. But I never lost the skills. I never forgot how to investigate. So as I sat in my living room that night, nursing my whiskey and watching the city lights, I wasn't just angry. I was planning. I turned my phone back on and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Sandra Chen, my old supervisor at DHS, who retired 5 years ago but still freelanced as a private investigator. Sandra, I said when she answered. It's Dorothy. I need a favor. We talked for 20 minutes. I told her about Cassidy, about the wedding, about everything that had happened. Sandra listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Dorothy, she said finally, are you sure you want to go down this road? Because once you start digging into someone's life like this, you can't take it back. I'm sure, I said. I need to know who I'm dealing with. Okay, Sandra said. Give me 48 hours. I'll see what I can find on Miss Cassidy Walsh. But I didn't want to wait 48 hours. I was 71 years old, and I'd spent 37 years being patient, being careful, being the responsible one. Tonight, patience felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. So I poured myself another whiskey and fired up my laptop. The first thing I found was Cassidy's social media. She'd made her accounts private after the engagement, probably Sandra's advice to avoid drama, but I'd learned long ago that people are careless with their digital footprints. A few strategic searches through Trevor's friends' accounts, a little cross-referencing with tagged photos and location data, and I had a pretty complete picture of Cassidy Walsh's life. What I found was interesting. Very interesting. Cassidy had grown up wealthy, that much was true. The house in Greenwich was real, as were the private schools and the family vacations to Martha's Vineyard. But the Walsh family fortune wasn't quite as solid as they pretended it was. Richard Walsh had been a real estate developer, but not a particularly successful one. He'd filed for bankruptcy twice in the 1990s, restructured his business 3 times, and currently owned a property management company that was hemorrhaging money. The Greenwich house was mortgaged to the hilt. The cars were leased. Even the designer clothes Cassidy wore were purchased with credit cards that were probably maxed out. The Walsh family was house rich and cash poor, living on credit and appearance, desperately trying to maintain a lifestyle they could no longer afford. Which explained why Cassidy had been so eager to move across the country to marry a city employee in Portland, Oregon. It wasn't love, it was financial survival. She needed to marry someone stable, someone with assets, someone who could provide the security her family's crumbling empire couldn't. And my apartment, my beautiful, appreciating in value apartment in one of Portland's most desirable neighborhoods, was exactly the kind of asset that could solve all her problems. But that was just the beginning. The deeper I dug, the more interesting it got. Cassidy had been engaged before, twice actually. Once to a banker in Manhattan who'd broken it off after 6 months, and once to a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco who'd ended things even more abruptly after just 2 months. I found the banker through LinkedIn and sent him a carefully crafted message, posing as someone who'd met Cassidy at a charity event and was trying to reconnect. He was surprisingly forthcoming once I got him talking. "Beautiful girl," he wrote back. Charming, intelligent, seemed perfect on the surface. But there were red flags. She was very interested in my financial situation, kept asking about my investment portfolio, my real estate holdings. Started making comments about how we should pool our resources, how her family could help me expand my business. When I asked her to sign a prenup, she broke up with me via text message. The tech entrepreneur was even more revealing. I found him through a mutual friend's Facebook page and reached out as a concerned friend who was worried about Cassidy's well-being. "She's getting married," he wrote back immediately. "Jesus, I hope that guy knows what he's getting into." Look, I don't want to trash talk anyone, but Cassidy Walsh is dangerous. She had me convinced that I needed to invest my company's startup capital in her father's development projects. Said it would be a great way to combine our families, our resources. I almost did it too, before my business partner ran a background check and discovered that Richard Walsh's company was basically insolvent. When I confronted her about it, she turned into a completely different person. Screaming, throwing things, threatening to ruin my reputation if I didn't go through with the investment. I had to get a restraining order. A restraining order. I filed that information away for later use. By 3 a.m, I had a complete picture of Cassidy Walsh. She wasn't just a spoiled rich girl trying to maintain her lifestyle, she was a predator. A beautiful, charming predator who targeted men with assets, convinced them to trust her, and then systematically stripped them of everything they had. Trevor was just her latest mark. And my apartment was her biggest score yet. But the most interesting discovery came at the very end of my research, buried in a Society page article from the Greenwich Time about a charity gala from 2019. In the background of one of the photos, barely visible but unmistakably there, was a woman I recognized. A woman who'd played a very specific role in tonight's drama. The woman was in her early 50s, elegantly dressed, standing next to Richard Walsh at what appeared to be a private conversation during the gala. The caption identified her as local businesswoman and event planner M. Torres. M. Torres. Maria Torres. I knew that name. I knew it because Maria Torres had been at the wedding tonight. She'd been sitting at the back, dressed in black, barely noticeable among all the other guests. I'd assumed she was just another friend of the family, someone from Cassidy's Connecticut crowd. But now I realized she was something else entirely. I'd seen Maria Torres before, years ago, during my days as a DHS investigator. She'd been involved in a case I'd worked on, a complex financial fraud scheme involving elderly victims and manipulated real estate transactions. We'd never been able to prove she was directly involved, but her name had come up enough times that I'd remembered it. Maria Torres was what we called a cleaner in the business. Someone who specialized in making complicated problems disappear. Legal problems, financial problems, personal problems, for the right price, Maria Torres could make them all go away. And she'd been at my son's wedding. Watching. Waiting. For what? I closed my laptop and finished my whiskey, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a greedy daughter-in-law trying to steal my apartment. This was something much bigger, much more dangerous. Cassidy Walsh wasn't working alone. She had help. Professional help. And that changed everything. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 15 years. Bobby? It's Dorothy. I know it's late, but I need to see you. Tomorrow morning. It's important. Bobby Carmichael had been my partner at DHS back in the day. He'd left the state job to become a private investigator, and over the years, he'd built up a network of contacts that stretched from Portland to Sacramento to Las Vegas. If anyone could help me figure out what I was really dealing with, it was Bobby. Dorothy? His voice was groggy with sleep, but I could hear him sitting up in bed. Jesus, it's been what, 5 years? 6. What's going on? I can't explain over the phone, I said. But Bobby, I think I've stumbled into something big. Something that involves professional grifters, financial fraud, maybe even organized crime. And they're targeting my family. There was a long pause. Where do you want to meet? He said finally. My apartment. 9 a.m. And Bobby? Come alone. I don't know who else might be involved in this. After I hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, looking out at the city lights and thinking about everything I'd learned. Somewhere out there, my son was probably lying in bed next to his new wife, convinced that his mother had ruined his wedding with her selfish stubbornness. He had no idea that he'd just married a woman who saw him as nothing more than a payday, a stepping stone to financial security. And somewhere else, Maria Torres was probably making phone calls, adjusting plans, preparing for whatever came next. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that Dorothy Henderson was just another lonely old widow, easy to manipulate and easier to discard. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Bobby Carmichael showed up at my apartment at exactly 9 a.m., looking like he'd stepped out of a detective novel. Gray beard, weathered face, eyes that missed nothing. He was 68 years old and had been in the investigation business for over 40 years. If there was dirty work being done in the Pacific Northwest, Bobby knew about it. I made coffee, strong coffee, and laid out everything I'd discovered the night before. Photos, social media screenshots, financial records, the whole timeline of Cassidy's previous relationships. Bobby studied it all with the methodical attention of a man who'd spent his career connecting dots that other people missed. Jesus, Dorothy, he said after 20 minutes of silent reading. You've been busy. That's not even the interesting part, I said. I pulled up the photo from the Greenwich Charity Gala, zoomed in on Maria Torres, and slid the laptop across the table. Bobby's expression changed immediately. Well, I'll be damned. Maria Torres. I haven't seen that face in, what, 8 years? You know her? Know her? Dorothy, I've been chasing Maria Torres for the better part of a decade. She runs the most sophisticated elder fraud operation on the West Coast. Real estate scams, insurance fraud, identity theft, you name it, she's got her fingers in it. Bobby pulled out his own laptop and started pulling up files. Look at this. Maria Torres, born Maria Elena Sandoval in Tijuana in 1971. Came to the U.S. in 1989, married Robert Torres in 1993, green card marriage, he got $20,000 and she got citizenship. Divorced 6 months later. Started working as a real estate agent in San Diego, but that was just the legitimate front. The screen filled with photos, police reports, financial documents. Maria Torres had been busy over the past 30 years. Her specialty is what we call soft cons, Bobby continued. She doesn't break into your house or steal your credit cards. Instead, she identifies wealthy targets, usually elderly people with substantial assets, and then orchestrates elaborate schemes to separate them from their money. She's got a whole network of people working for her. Beautiful young women who seduce lonely widowers, charming men who romance wealthy widows, financial advisors who seem legitimate but are actually steering people toward investments that benefit Maria's organization. I felt my blood turn cold. You're saying Cassidy works for this woman? I'm saying it's possible. More than possible, actually. Bobby pulled up another file. Look at this case from 2018. Elderly man in Sacramento, recently widowed, worth about $2 million. He meets a beautiful young woman at a coffee shop, a woman who happens to be new to the city, recently out of a bad relationship, looking for a fresh start. Sound familiar? It sounded terrifyingly familiar. They date for 6 months, Bobby continued. She's sweet, caring, seems genuinely interested in him. Talks about how she wants to help him enjoy his golden years, how she wants to travel with him, see the world. Suggests that he sell his big empty house and downsize to something more manageable. Recommends a specific real estate agent, a lovely woman named Maria Torres who specializes in helping seniors transition to retirement living. Oh my God, I whispered. The house sells for under market value. Maria's agency handles both sides of the transaction and pockets the commission plus a nice chunk of the difference between market value and sales price. The old man moves into a senior community that's owned by a shell company connected to Maria's network. His girlfriend convinces him to invest his remaining money in a development project that looks legitimate on paper but is actually just a way to funnel money into Maria's accounts. Bobby turned the laptop screen toward me. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the old man had lost everything. The girlfriend had disappeared, Maria Torres had closed her real estate office and opened a new one under a different name, and $2 million had been laundered through so many shell companies that it was untraceable. I stared at the police report, at the photos of the elderly victim, at the financial documents that tracked his systematic destruction. How many times has she done this? I asked. That we know of? At least 15 in the past decade, probably more. The victims are usually too embarrassed to report it, and by the time the family realizes what's happened, the evidence is gone and the money's disappeared into offshore accounts. But if you know all this, if you have all this evidence, why isn't she in prison? Bobby's laugh was bitter. Because Maria Torres is very, very good at what she does. She never directly touches the money. She never makes the promises. She never signs the contracts. She's always just the helpful real estate agent, or the concerned friend, or the event planner who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The actual theft is always done by people who seem to have no connection to her, beautiful young women with clean records, charming men with legitimate businesses, financial advisors with proper licenses. Like Cassidy. Like Cassidy. And if the authorities get too close, if someone starts asking too many questions, then the attractive young woman or charming man suddenly disappears. New identity, new city, new victim. Maria Torres always stays clean. I thought about the wedding, about how Maria Torres had been sitting in the back, observing everything. Watching as Cassidy made her play for my apartment keys. Watching as the plan unraveled in front of 200 witnesses. Bobby, I said slowly, what happens when one of their operations goes wrong? When the mark doesn't cooperate? His expression grew dark. That's when things get ugly, Dorothy. That's when Maria Torres stops being subtle and starts being direct. He pulled up another file. 2016, elderly woman in Eugene. She figured out what was happening before they could complete the con. Refused to sell her house, threatened to go to the police. 3 weeks later, she was found at the bottom of her basement stairs. Broken neck. The death was ruled accidental, but you don't believe it was. I know it wasn't. But proving it? That's another story entirely. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us understanding the implications. I wasn't just dealing with a greedy daughter-in-law trying to steal my apartment. I was dealing with professional criminals who'd killed to protect their operations. Dorothy, Bobby said quietly, I need you to understand something. These people don't give up. They don't just walk away when a con goes bad. They've got too much invested, too much at stake. And after what happened at the wedding last night, they know you're a threat. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to be very, very careful. And you need to think seriously about whether you want to fight this battle or whether you want to pack up and disappear for a while. I looked around my apartment, my beautiful, perfect apartment that I'd worked 37 years to own. At the windows overlooking the river, at the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, at the bedroom where I'd read countless books and dreamed countless dreams. This is my home, Bobby. I'm not running. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. Okay. Then we need to be smart about this. We need to build a case that's so airtight, so comprehensive, that even Maria Torres can't wiggle out of it. How do we do that? Bobby closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. We give them what they want. What? We let them think they've won. We let them proceed with their plan, and we document everything. Every conversation, every meeting, every financial transaction. We gather evidence until we have enough to put them all away for a very long time. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. You're talking about me pretending to cooperate with them? Pretending to go along with selling my apartment? Exactly. But Dorothy, you need to understand what you'd be getting into. These people are dangerous. If they figure out what you're doing, if they realize you're gathering evidence against them. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the risks. What would I need to do? First, you'd need to call Trevor. Apologize for the scene at the wedding. Tell him you were overwhelmed, that you've been thinking about what Cassidy said, that maybe she's right about you needing to downsize. Make it seem like you're having second thoughts. The idea of apologizing to Trevor, of pretending that Cassidy's assault was somehow my fault, made my stomach turn. But I could see the logic in Bobby's plan. Then you wait. You let them come to you. And when they do, you record everything. Every phone call, every meeting, every contract they ask you to sign. You gather evidence not just against Cassidy, but against Maria Torres and the whole network. How long would this take? Months, probably. Maybe longer. These operations move slowly, methodically. They can't afford to rush things or make mistakes. I thought about spending months pretending to cooperate with the people who wanted to destroy my life. Months of smiling at Cassidy, of pretending to trust Maria Torres, of watching my son believe that his wife was helping his confused old mother make smart decisions. It would be hell. But it would also be justice. There's something else, Bobby said, his voice careful. If we do this, if we gather enough evidence to bring down Maria Torres's operation, you'll be a key witness in a federal case. Your life will never be completely private again. You'll have to testify in court, probably multiple times. The defense attorneys will try to destroy your credibility, dig into every aspect of your past. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the woman who'd slapped me in front of 200 people. The woman who'd called me a selfish old woman for refusing to give up my home. The woman who was systematically destroying my relationship with my son. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. Bobby nodded slowly. Okay. But before you make that call to Trevor, there's something else you need to know. Something I discovered when I was researching Maria Torres last year. He hesitated, and I could see there was something he didn't want to tell me. What is it? Dorothy, I think Maria Torres has been watching you for a while. Longer than just since Cassidy met Trevor. What do you mean? I mean, I think she identified you as a potential mark months ago, maybe even years ago. I think she researched you, your financial situation, your family dynamics. And I think she specifically targeted Trevor as a way to get to you. The room seemed to spin around me. Are you saying that Cassidy meeting Trevor wasn't an accident? I'm saying it's possible. Maria Torres is very good at arranging coincidental meetings. Coffee shops, bookstores, charity events, online dating sites, she's got people everywhere, looking for the right opportunities. I thought back to how Trevor had met Cassidy. At a brewery in the Pearl District, just 6 blocks from my apartment. Trevor had been there with friends, Cassidy had been there alone, and they'd struck up a conversation about the local beer scene. It had seemed so natural, so organic. But what if it wasn't? What if Cassidy had been waiting for him, knowing his schedule, knowing his habits? How long? I asked. How long do you think they've been planning this? Bobby pulled up another file on his computer. I found some interesting financial activity connected to Maria Torres's network. Payments to investigators, background check services, property research companies. All of it focused on the Portland area, specifically the Pearl District. The activity goes back almost 3 years. 3 years. They'd been planning to destroy my life for 3 years. I felt something change inside me then, something cold and hard and unforgiving. This wasn't just about my apartment anymore. This wasn't just about a greedy daughter-in-law or a complicated family situation. This was war. And they'd just made the mistake of picking a fight with someone who knew how to fight back. Bobby, I said, my voice steady and calm, I want you to get me everything. Every case file, every police report, every financial record connected to Maria Torres and her operation. I want names, dates, bank accounts, shell companies, everything. Dorothy. And then I want you to help me destroy them. All of them. Not just stop their current operation, but bring down the entire network. I want Maria Torres in federal prison for the rest of her life. Bobby studied my face for a long moment. You're sure about this? Because once we start down this road. I'm sure, I said. Make the call. As Bobby started making arrangements with his contacts in federal law enforcement, I walked to my bedroom window and looked out at the river. Somewhere out there, Cassidy was probably planning her next move. Somewhere else, Maria Torres was adjusting her strategy, preparing for the next phase of the operation. But they'd made one crucial error in their calculations. They'd assumed that Dorothy Henderson was just another vulnerable elderly woman, alone and defenseless and easy to manipulate. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The hardest phone call I've ever made was to my son the day after his wedding. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number, and my voice cracked when he answered. But I had to sound broken, confused, apologetic. I had to convince him that I was exactly the kind of vulnerable old woman that Cassidy and Maria Torres believed me to be. Trevor? I said, letting tears creep into my voice. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about last night. There was a long pause. When Trevor finally spoke, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. Mom, what the hell was that? What were you thinking? I don't know, I said, letting myself sob. I was so overwhelmed, so scared about everything changing. And when Cassidy asked for the keys, it just felt so final, you know? Like I was losing everything all at once. Mom, she was trying to help you. We've talked about this. You agreed to the timeline, remember? I closed my eyes and forced myself to say the words. I know, sweetheart. I know I agreed. I've been thinking about it all night, and you're right. Cassidy's right. I'm just a scared old woman who can't accept that things need to change. I could hear the relief in his voice. Oh, Mom. I was so worried. Cassidy was devastated. She thought she'd done something wrong, said something to upset you. Devastated. The woman who'd slapped me in front of 200 people was devastated that she'd upset me. She didn't do anything wrong, I said, the lies burning in my throat. She's been nothing but patient and kind, and I've been horrible to her. Is there any way I could talk to her? To apologize? Of course, Mom. She's right here. Hold on. A moment later, Cassidy's voice came through the phone, sweet and concerned and utterly false. Dorothy? Oh, sweetheart, are you okay? I've been so worried about you. Cassidy, I'm so sorry, I said, pouring every ounce of fake remorse I could muster into my voice. I was awful to you last night. You've been trying to help me, and I've been fighting you every step of the way. Oh, Dorothy, you don't need to apologize. I understand how scary this must be for you. Change is hard, especially when you're dealing with so much. At my age. She'd almost said, at my age, but caught herself. Even in her moment of supposed forgiveness, she couldn't help but remind me of my place in her world. I've been thinking about what you said, I continued. About the apartment, about downsizing, about all of it. And I think maybe you're right. Maybe it is time for me to make some changes. I could hear the excitement in her voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Really? Oh, Dorothy, that's wonderful. I think you're going to love the senior community we looked at. It's going to be such a relief not to have to worry about maintenance and property taxes and all those stressful things. Could we maybe get together this week? Go over the details again? I want to make sure I understand everything, and I want to do this right. For you and Trevor. Of course. Why don't I come by your apartment tomorrow afternoon? We can look at all the paperwork together, make sure everything's clear. And Dorothy? I think you're going to be so much happier once this transition is complete. Transition. Always with the euphemisms. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Real tears this time, tears of rage and heartbreak and fear. But also tears of determination. Because every lie I'd just told, every word of fake contrition, was bringing me closer to destroying the people who'd tried to destroy me. Bobby had spent the morning installing recording equipment throughout my apartment. Tiny cameras hidden in picture frames and bookshelf decorations. Audio recorders disguised as houseplants and decorative objects. Everything was wireless, everything was digital, and everything was admissible in federal court. The key, Bobby explained as he showed me how the system worked, is to get them talking about the bigger operation. We need Maria Torres on tape discussing other victims, other cons. We need financial details, names of accomplices, evidence of the network. How do I do that? You be exactly what they think you are, a confused old woman who needs guidance. Ask questions about how the process works, about other people they've helped, about what happens to your money after the sale. Let them think you're impressed by their expertise. The next afternoon, Cassidy arrived at my apartment carrying a leather portfolio and wearing what I was beginning to recognize as her helpful daughter-in-law costume. Tailored pants, silk blouse, minimal makeup, expensive but understated jewelry. She looked like someone you'd trust with your life savings. "Dorothy," she said, giving me a warm hug that made my skin crawl. "You look so much better than yesterday. I can see you're feeling more at peace with everything." I lied. "I had a long talk with myself last night, and I realized how lucky I am to have you looking out for me." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast that morning, the same table where Bobby and I had planned this elaborate deception. Cassidy spread out the paperwork with the enthusiasm of a predator who smells blood. "Now," she said, pulling out a folder, "I've been working with a wonderful real estate agent who specializes in helping seniors with transitions like this. Her name is Maria Torres, and she's absolutely amazing. She's helped so many people in situations just like yours." So many people in situations just like mine. I wondered how many of them were still alive. "She sounds perfect," I said. "How did you find her?" "Oh, she came highly recommended. My family has worked with her before. She helped my great-aunt transition to assisted living a few years ago in Connecticut. The whole process was so smooth, so professional. Aunt Eleanor was thrilled with how everything turned out." I made a mental note to have Bobby research Cassidy's great-aunt Eleanor. Something told me that story wouldn't end well. "Now, Maria has looked at your apartment, and she thinks we can get excellent value for it. The Pearl District market is so hot right now, especially for properties with river views like yours." "She's looked at my apartment?" "When?" Cassidy's smile flickered for just a moment. "Oh, I hope you don't mind. I had her do a preliminary assessment while you were at the hair salon yesterday morning. Trevor let her in with his key. We wanted to be able to give you accurate numbers. They'd been in my home. Without my permission, without my knowledge, they'd walked through my private space, evaluating it like livestock at auction." That's very thorough," I said, swallowing my rage. "Maria's very thorough. That's what makes her so good at what she does." Cassidy pulled out a thick document. "She's prepared a complete transition plan for you. Timeline, financial projections, moving assistance, everything." The document was impressive, 30 pages of professional-looking charts and graphs and projections. But as I read through it, I began to understand the true scope of what they were planning. The apartment sale was just the beginning. They also wanted me to cash out my retirement accounts, liquidate my small investment portfolio, and even sell my car. Everything I owned would be converted to cash, and that cash would be professionally managed by a financial advisory firm that I was quite certain existed only on paper. "This seems very comprehensive," I said, letting uncertainty creep into my voice. I had no idea there would be so many steps. "I know it looks overwhelming," Cassidy said, leaning forward with false sympathy. "But that's why you have us to help you. Maria will handle all the complicated financial stuff, and I'll be there to support you through every step. You won't have to worry about anything." "Has Maria helped other people with this kind of comprehensive transition?" Cassidy's eyes lit up. I'd asked exactly the right question. "Oh, Dorothy, she's helped dozens of families. Just last year, she worked with a lovely couple in Sacramento. The husband had dementia, and the wife was overwhelmed trying to manage everything. Maria helped them liquidate all their assets and move into a beautiful care facility where they could both get the support they needed." Sacramento. Bobby had mentioned a case in Sacramento. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "What happened to them? Are they happy with the arrangement?" "Oh, tragically, the husband passed away not long after the move. The stress of the transition, you know, Sometimes it's too much for people that age. But the wife is doing beautifully. She's traveling now, seeing the world with the money from the sale. Maria says she sends postcards from all over Europe. I bet she does. I bet those postcards are very creative. And your great-aunt Eleanor? How is she doing in her new place? For the first time since she'd arrived, Cassidy looked uncomfortable. Oh, Aunt Eleanor, well, she's not. She passed away about 6 months after her move. Natural causes, of course. Old age. But she was so grateful for Maria's help right up until the end. Natural causes. Old age. I was starting to see a pattern in Maria Torres's success stories. I'm sorry for your loss, I said gently. Thank you. But you see, that's exactly why this kind of planning is so important. Eleanor was able to spend her final months in comfort, without the stress of managing property and investments and all those complicated things. And because Maria helped her organize everything properly, there was money left over for the family. Left over for the family. I wondered how much of Eleanor's estate actually made it to her relatives, and how much ended up in Maria Torres's accounts. It sounds like Maria really knows what she's doing, I said. When can I meet her? Actually, Cassidy said, checking her phone, she's in the area today. Would you be comfortable if I called her now? I know she'd love to meet you and answer any questions you might have. My heart started racing. This was moving faster than Bobby and I had anticipated. But the recording equipment was running, and I needed to stay in character. That would be wonderful, I said. Cassidy made the call, speaking in Spanish for part of the conversation, probably assuming I wouldn't understand. But I'd picked up enough Spanish during my years as an investigator to follow the basic content. She was telling Maria that the target was ready, that I seemed confused and compliant, and that they should move quickly before she changes her mind again. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. Maria Torres was even more impressive in person than she'd been in the surveillance photos Bobby had shown me. Perfectly styled black hair, elegant makeup, expensive clothing that whispered rather than shouted wealth. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Mrs. Henderson, she said, taking my hands in both of hers, what a pleasure to finally meet you. Cassidy has told me so much about you. And may I say, you have absolutely beautiful taste. This apartment is stunning. Her accent was faint but carefully cultivated, enough to seem exotic and interesting, not enough to seem foreign or threatening. Thank you, I said, playing the role of the flattered elderly woman. Please, call me Dorothy. And thank you for coming on such short notice. Cassidy says you're very good at helping people in situations like mine. I've been fortunate to assist many families through major life transitions, Maria said smoothly. It's rewarding work, helping people find peace of mind in their golden years. We sat in my living room, and Maria immediately took control of the conversation. She was a master at what she did. Within minutes, she had me talking about my finances, my fears about the future, my concerns about being a burden on Trevor. Dorothy, she said, her voice warm with manufactured concern, I want you to know that what you're feeling is completely normal. Many of my clients struggle with these same fears. The key is to remember that you're not losing independence, you're gaining security. How many clients have you worked with? I asked, trying to sound genuinely curious rather than investigatively probing. Over the years? Hundreds. Each situation is unique, of course, but the fundamentals are always the same. We identify assets that are creating stress rather than value, we liquidate those assets in the most advantageous way possible, and we reinvest the proceeds in vehicles that provide both security and growth. Vehicles that provide both security and growth. Like offshore accounts that her network controlled. Can you tell me about some of your other clients? I'd love to hear about people who've been through this successfully. Maria and Cassidy exchanged a quick glance, the kind of look that passes between co-conspirators when their mark asks exactly the right question. Well, there was Mr. Davidson in Eugene, Maria said. Lovely gentleman, recent widower, very similar situation to yours. He had a beautiful home that was just too much for him to manage alone, plus substantial savings that weren't working as hard as they could be. Eugene. That was the case Bobby had mentioned, the woman who died in a suspicious fall. What happened to him? Oh, Mr. Davidson is doing wonderfully. We helped him transition to a lovely senior community in Bend, and his investment portfolio is performing beautifully. He sends me Christmas cards every year, thanking me for helping him find peace in his retirement. Christmas cards from a dead man. Maria Torres was either delusional or an incredibly gifted liar. And there was Mrs. Chen in Sacramento, Cassidy added. The one I mentioned earlier, with the husband who had dementia. Yes, tragic situation, Maria said, shaking her head sadly. But we were able to help them liquidate everything before the medical bills became overwhelming. The transition was smooth, and Mrs. Chen was able to focus on spending quality time with her husband in his final months. Where is Mrs. Chen now? I asked. Traveling, as Cassidy mentioned. Europe, I believe. She calls occasionally to update me on her adventures. I made another mental note for Bobby to research. I had a feeling that Mrs. Chen's adventures were significantly less exotic than Maria claimed. Now, Dorothy, Maria continued, pulling out her own set of documents, I've prepared some preliminary numbers based on Cassidy's description of your situation. Obviously, we'll need to do a more thorough assessment, but this should give you an idea of what we're working with. The numbers were staggering. According to Maria's calculations, my apartment was worth $500,000, $50,000 more than the actual market value. My retirement accounts and investments, which I knew totaled about $120,000, were listed as $160,000. Even my car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic, was valued at $8,000, about 3 times what it was actually worth. These numbers seem optimistic, I said carefully. I prefer to think of them as reflective of full potential, Maria said smoothly. The Portland market is very hot right now, and your apartment has some unique features that make it particularly valuable. The river view, the historic building, the location, all of these add premium value. And you think you can get these prices? I don't think, Dorothy. I know. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have relationships with buyers who pay premium prices for premium properties. Buyers who pay premium prices. Like shell companies that existed only to launder stolen money. What would happen to the money after everything is sold? I asked. Excellent question, Maria said, clearly pleased with my interest. We'd set up a comprehensive investment portfolio managed by a firm I work with regularly. They specialize in conservative, growth-oriented investments perfect for people in your situation. You'd have a guaranteed monthly income that would more than cover your expenses at the senior community, plus growth potential to protect against inflation. How much monthly income are we talking about? Maria consulted her papers. Based on these preliminary numbers, I'd estimate somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 per month. More than enough for a comfortable lifestyle, plus money left over for travel, gifts to family, whatever brings you joy. $4,000 to $5,000 per month from a $680,000 investment portfolio would require a return of almost 9% annually, possible, but only with significant risk. Conservative investments in 2023 were yielding maybe 4%, which would generate closer to $2,000 per month. But Maria Torres wasn't planning to invest my money in legitimate markets. She was planning to steal it, probably within weeks of the transaction's closing. That sounds almost too good to be true, I said, letting wonder creep into my voice. Dorothy, Maria said, leaning forward with the intensity of a true believer, I understand your skepticism. Most people in your situation have been dealing with traditional financial advisors who think small, who are satisfied with mediocre returns. But when you work with people who understand the high-end investment world, who have access to opportunities that aren't available to the general public, you can achieve returns that seem impossible to conventional wisdom. High-end investment world. Opportunities not available to the general public. She was describing a Ponzi scheme in language designed to make it sound exclusive and sophisticated. How soon would all this happen? I asked. Well, that depends on you, Cassidy interjected. But Maria thinks we could have everything wrapped up within 60 days if we move quickly. 60 days. They wanted to complete the entire con in 2 months. The key, Maria added, is momentum. Once we start the process, it's important to keep moving forward. Properties sit on the market longer when there are delays and interruptions. Buyers lose interest, prices drop, opportunities disappear. Translation: once I signed the initial paperwork, I'd be locked into a process that would strip me of everything I owned in a matter of weeks. I need to think about this, I said, playing the overwhelmed elderly woman perfectly. It's a lot to take in. Of course it is, Maria said soothingly. But Dorothy, I want you to remember something. This kind of opportunity doesn't come along every day. The market conditions are perfect right now, my buyer network is very active, and the senior community has immediate availability. If we wait too long, if we let this window close, you might not get another chance like this. Artificial urgency. The classic pressure tactic used by scammers throughout history. What would be the first step? I asked. Just some simple paperwork, Cassidy said quickly. Power of attorney forms so Maria can act on your behalf during the sales process. Authorization to access your financial accounts so she can coordinate everything seamlessly. Just basic administrative stuff. Power of attorney. Authorization to access financial accounts. They were asking me to give them complete control over everything I owned. I'd want Trevor to look at everything before I sign, I said. Of course, Maria said. Though I should mention that many of my clients find it easier to handle these transitions without too much family input. Adult children sometimes have emotional attachments to properties and situations that can complicate what should be straightforward financial decisions. They didn't want Trevor involved. They wanted me isolated, dependent only on their guidance. But Trevor's very supportive, Cassidy said quickly. He understands that this is what's best for you. In fact, he's the one who suggested we move quickly, while you're feeling positive about the changes. Another lie. Trevor had no idea what they were really planning. Well, I said, standing up slowly, I think I need a day or two to process everything. This is all very exciting, but it's also a big change. Maria and Cassidy exchanged another look, disappointment this time, mixed with calculation. Of course, Dorothy, Maria said. But please, don't wait too long. As I mentioned, timing is critical with these kinds of opportunities. After they left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about everything I just heard. Bobby's recording equipment had captured every word, every lie, every manipulative tactic they'd used to try to convince me to sign over my life savings. But we needed more. We needed evidence of the broader network, proof of other victims, financial records that would tie Maria Torres directly to the thefts. And I had an idea of how to get it. That evening, I called Cassidy back. I've been thinking about what you and Maria said, I told her. And I want to move forward. But I have one request. Of course, Dorothy. What is it? I'd like to meet some of Maria's other clients. People who've been through this process successfully. I think it would help me feel more confident about everything if I could talk to someone who's actually experienced what I'm about to go through. There was a long pause. I could practically hear Cassidy's mind working, trying to figure out how to respond to a request that she couldn't possibly fulfill, because Maria's successful clients were all dead or financially destroyed. That's a wonderful idea, Cassidy said finally. I'll talk to Maria and see who might be available. Great. And Cassidy? I'm ready to sign whatever paperwork we need to get started. The sooner the better. I could hear the excitement in her voice. Really? Oh, Dorothy, that's fantastic. I'll call Maria right now and set up another meeting for tomorrow. After I hung up, I called Bobby. How did it go? He asked. Better than we hoped. I've got them on tape discussing multiple victims, and they're pushing for me to sign power of attorney documents tomorrow. Jesus, Dorothy. They're moving fast. Too fast. They're getting sloppy, overconfident. And I think I know how we can use that against them. What do you mean? I asked to speak with their previous clients. People who've successfully gone through the transition process. Bobby was quiet for a moment. Dorothy, those people are dead or financially ruined, I know. But they don't know that I know. So tomorrow, they're going to have to figure out how to produce happy, successful clients who don't exist. And when they do, we'll have them on fraud charges that will stick. You're playing a very dangerous game. No, I said, looking out at the river lights, thinking about all the elderly people who'd trusted Maria Torres and paid for that trust with their life savings or their lives. I'm playing the only game that matters. And I'm going to win. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that changed everything. I was making coffee, preparing for what I expected would be another meeting with Maria and Cassidy, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Henderson? This is Detective Sarah Kim with the Portland Police Bureau. I'm calling about an incident that occurred at a wedding reception on Saturday night. My blood ran cold. What kind of incident? We received a complaint about an assault. Apparently, there was some kind of altercation, and we'd like to speak with you about what happened. Someone had reported the slap. In all my planning and scheming, I hadn't considered that one of the wedding guests might have called the police. Who filed the complaint? I asked. I can't share that information over the phone, Mrs. Henderson. But I would like to meet with you this morning if possible. Are you available? I agreed to meet Detective Kim at my apartment in an hour, then immediately called Bobby. This could be good or bad, he said after I explained the situation. If someone witnessed what happened and is willing to testify, it gives us leverage. But if Maria Torres has connections in law enforcement. What are you saying? I'm saying be very careful what you tell this detective until we know whose side she's on. Detective Kim arrived promptly at 10 a.m. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of my old self at the Department of Human Services. Mrs. Henderson, she said, settling into my living room, I understand there was an incident at your son's wedding reception on Saturday night. Can you walk me through what happened? I told her the truth, or most of it. The pressure to sell my apartment, Cassidy's demand for my keys, the slap in front of 200 guests. I left out the parts about Maria Torres, the criminal investigation, and the recording equipment currently documenting our conversation. Detective Kim took careful notes. You said she struck you in front of witnesses. How many people saw this happen? Everyone. The entire reception. Maybe 200 people. And yet you didn't call the police that night. You didn't seek medical attention. You didn't file a report. Can you help me understand why? It was a fair question, and I could see the skepticism in her eyes. Elderly victims of domestic violence often protect their abusers, and from her perspective, that's exactly what this looked like. She's my son's wife, I said simply. I didn't want to ruin their wedding, their marriage, over one moment of conflict. Mrs. Henderson, what happened to you wasn't a moment of conflict. It was assault. And according to the witness who called it in, it was part of a larger pattern of harassment and intimidation. Witness. Singular. One person out of 200 had cared enough to call the police. Who was the witness? I asked. Detective Kim hesitated. Usually I wouldn't share that information, but given the circumstances, it was Marcus Delacroix. He identified himself as your son's best friend? Marcus. Trevor's best man. The same Marcus who'd barely been able to look at me at the wedding, who'd congratulated me on my generous sacrifice. But he'd seen what really happened, and he'd done the right thing. Marcus called you? He called Sunday morning. Said he'd been thinking about what he witnessed all night and couldn't let it go. He was very concerned about your safety, Mrs. Henderson. He seemed to think there might be more to the situation than just family drama. More to the situation. Marcus was sharper than I'd given him credit for. What happens now? I asked. That depends on you. We have a witness, we have evidence of assault, and if you're willing to cooperate, we can file charges against your daughter-in-law. I thought about the recording equipment, about Bobby's investigation, about the federal case we were building against Maria Torres. Assault charges against Cassidy might derail everything, or they might provide exactly the leverage we needed. Detective Kim, I said carefully, what if I told you that the assault was just the tip of the iceberg? That my daughter-in-law is involved in something much bigger, much more serious than family conflict? Her expression sharpened. What kind of bigger? I made a decision that would either destroy our investigation or supercharge it. Financial fraud. Elder abuse. Organized crime. And possibly murder. Detective Kim put down her pen and stared at me. Mrs. Henderson, those are very serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them? I have some evidence. And I'm working with someone who has a lot more. 20 minutes later, Bobby was sitting in my living room with Detective Kim, spreading out files and explaining the Maria Torres investigation. Kim listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each new piece of information. How long has this federal investigation been active? She asked. Officially? About 3 years. Unofficially, various agencies have been tracking Maria Torres for almost a decade. The problem is jurisdiction. She operates across state lines, uses shell companies incorporated in different states, and she's very good at staying legally clean. But now she's operating in Portland. In my jurisdiction. Now she's operating in Portland, Bobby agreed. And she's made her first major mistake in years. Detective Kim turned to me. Mrs. Henderson, you understand what you're getting yourself into? If what Mr. Carmichael is telling me is accurate, these people have killed to protect their operations. I understand. But detective, they've been planning to destroy my life for 3 years. They've already destroyed dozens of other lives. Someone has to stop them. Kim studied me for a long moment. What do you need from me? Cooperation, Bobby said. Let us continue the investigation while you build the assault case. When we have enough evidence to bring down the whole network, we'll coordinate arrests. How long are we talking about? Days, maybe a week. Dorothy's got them believing she's ready to sign over power of attorney. Once they produce the forged documents, once they try to access her accounts, we'll have them on multiple federal charges. Detective Kim nodded slowly. Okay. But Mrs. Henderson, I want you to understand something. The moment you feel unsafe, the moment anything feels wrong, you call me immediately. Don't try to be a hero. After she left, Bobby and I reviewed our plans. The recording equipment had captured everything from yesterday's meeting, but we needed more. We needed evidence that would implicate not just Maria and Cassidy, but the entire network. They're going to want you to sign documents today, Bobby said. When they do, we'll have them on attempted fraud. But I want to push them further, get them to reveal more about their operations. How? Ask about the money. Ask detailed questions about where your funds will be invested, who manages the accounts, how you can access your money if you need it. Get them talking about the financial infrastructure. At 2 p.m., Maria and Cassidy returned to my apartment. This time, Maria brought a briefcase full of official-looking documents and a laptop computer. "Dorothy," she said, settling at my kitchen table, "I'm so pleased you've decided to move forward with this. I think you're going to be amazed at how much easier your life becomes once these transitions are complete." "I'm excited," I lied. But I had a few more questions after thinking about everything last night. "Of course," Maria said smoothly. "Questions are natural. What would you like to know?" "Well, you mentioned that my money would be managed by an investment firm. Could you tell me more about them? I'd love to know their track record, their investment philosophy, that sort of thing." Maria's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "Certainly. They're called Pacific Wealth Management, and they specialize in high-net-worth individuals transitioning into retirement. Their returns over the past 5 years have averaged 12% annually. 12% annually. In 2023, that was pure fantasy." "That's impressive," I said. "Are they based here in Portland?" "They have offices in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco. Very established firm, very conservative approach." "Could I visit their Portland office? Maybe meet with someone there before I commit to anything?" Another flicker of uncertainty. "Well, they don't typically meet with individual clients until the investment portfolios reach a certain threshold. But I could arrange a phone conference once your assets are liquidated." "Phone conference with a fake company?" "Of course. What about references? Other clients I could speak with?" "Actually," Cassidy interjected, "I have wonderful news about that. Maria was able to reach 2 of her previous clients who'd be happy to speak with you." My heart started racing. This was the moment of truth. Either they'd found actual clients, which was impossible, or they were about to commit to a deception that would destroy them. "Really? That's fantastic. When could I talk to them?" "Well, Mrs. Chen from Sacramento is available later this afternoon," Maria said, consulting her phone. "And Mr. Davidson from Eugene could speak with you tomorrow morning." Mrs. Chen and Mr. Davidson. The 2 clients they'd mentioned yesterday, both of whom I was certain were either dead or financially ruined. "I'd love to speak with them," I said. "Could we call them now?" Maria and Cassidy exchanged a look. "Well, Mrs. Chen is in Europe, remember? There's a significant time difference. But I could arrange a call for later today." "What time in Europe?" I'd have to check with her. She's traveling, so I'm not sure exactly where she is at the moment." "Of course. And Mr. Davidson?" "He's probably having lunch right now," Cassidy said quickly. "But I'm sure he'd be available this afternoon." I nodded enthusiastically. This is so helpful. I feel much better about everything knowing I can talk to people who've actually been through the process. Maria was clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, so she redirected to the paperwork. "Dorothy, why don't we get the administrative details handled first? Then you'll be all set up for the client conversations." She pulled a thick stack of documents from her briefcase. Power of attorney forms, financial authorizations, real estate listing agreements, everything they needed to take complete control of my assets. "This looks very official," I said, flipping through the pages. "Oh, it has to be," Maria said. "When you're dealing with properties and investments of this magnitude, everything has to be perfectly legal and documented." Perfectly legal. If only that were true. Should I have my lawyer review these before I sign? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Dorothy," Cassidy said carefully, "lawyers tend to overcomplicate these straightforward transactions. They ask unnecessary questions, create delays, charge enormous fees for work that isn't really necessary." Plus, Maria added, Some lawyers aren't familiar with the specialized investment vehicles we use. They might advise against opportunities that would be perfect for your situation. In other words, lawyers might recognize a scam when they saw one. I suppose you're right, I said. I trust your expertise. I picked up a pen and started to sign the first document, then stopped. Oh, I just realized, I should probably let Trevor know I'm doing this today. He'll want to be involved, won't he? Actually, Cassidy said quickly, Trevor and I talked about this last night. He thinks it might be easier for you to handle the paperwork without any distractions. Family members sometimes make these processes more stressful than they need to be. But he's my son. Shouldn't he at least know what's happening? He knows you're moving forward with the transition, Maria said smoothly. The details are really just administrative. You can catch him up on everything once it's complete. They were trying to isolate me completely. No lawyers, no family, no outside verification of anything they were telling me. Well, I said, if you think that's best. I signed the first document. Then the second. With each signature, I could see the excitement growing in their eyes. They thought they had me. If only they knew. As I worked through the stack of papers, signing away my life savings to criminals, Bobby's hidden cameras captured every moment. The federal prosecutors would have a field day with this evidence. There's one last thing, Maria said when I'd finished signing. We'll need access to your bank accounts to verify the asset information and coordinate transfers. Could you log into your online banking so I can confirm the account numbers? This was it. The moment they moved from fraud to attempted theft. Of course, I said, opening my laptop. I logged into my bank account, making sure the screen was visible to the hidden cameras. Maria leaned over to look, taking photos of the screen with her phone. Perfect, she said. Everything looks exactly as we expected. Within hours, I knew they'd be attempting to access those accounts. And when they did, Bobby's federal contacts would have everything they needed to bring down the entire network. So what happens next? I asked. We move quickly, Maria said, gathering up the signed documents. I'll get the property listing active tomorrow, start reaching out to my buyer network. The investment transfers should be complete within 2 weeks. 2 weeks to steal everything I'd worked 37 years to build. And I'll start making arrangements with the senior community, Cassidy added. Get you moved in as soon as possible. They were practically glowing with triumph. They thought they'd pulled off another perfect con. After they left, I called Bobby immediately. It's done, I said. They have signed documents, account information, everything they need to try to steal my money. Perfect. My federal contacts are standing by. The moment they attempt to access your accounts or transfer funds, we'll have them. What about the phone calls? The fake clients? Bobby laughed. Dorothy, you're brilliant. There's no way they can produce living, happy clients because those clients don't exist. When they try to fake those phone calls, we'll have them on additional fraud charges. How long do we wait? Not long. They're moving fast, which means they're making mistakes. I'd guess we'll have arrests within 48 hours. That evening, I sat in my apartment thinking about everything that had happened. In 2 days, I'd gone from being a victim of an elaborate con to being the key witness in a federal investigation that would destroy an entire criminal network. But the hardest part was still ahead of me. Trevor still didn't know the truth about his wife. When the arrests happened, when the whole story came out, it would devastate him. My son would learn that the woman he loved had married him for my money, that his entire relationship had been built on lies and manipulation. It would break his heart. But it was better than the alternative, watching Maria Torres and her network destroy more elderly victims while Cassidy slowly isolated Trevor and convinced him that his confused, selfish mother needed to be managed like a child. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Cassidy. Dorothy. I have such exciting news. Mrs. Chen is available to talk right now. Are you ready for that phone call? Mrs. Chen from Sacramento. The woman who was supposedly traveling through Europe, sending postcards from her adventures. I'd love to talk to her, I said. This was going to be interesting. Dorothy? Hold on just one moment while I get Mrs. Chen on the line. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding. Everything depended on this moment. If Maria Torres had somehow found an actual living client to vouch for her services, our entire investigation could collapse. But if she was about to attempt to deceive me with a fake phone call. Hello? Dorothy? This is Helen Chen. The voice was elderly, female, with a slight accent that could have been authentic. But there was something off about it, a quality that reminded me of the phone scammers who called trying to steal social security numbers from senior citizens. Mrs. Chen. It's so wonderful to talk to you. Cassidy tells me you've been through the same transition process I'm considering. Oh yes, dear. Maria Torres was an absolute godsend. When my husband developed dementia, I was so overwhelmed trying to manage everything. Our house, our investments, all those complicated financial decisions. Maria made everything so simple. The words sounded rehearsed, like someone reading from a script. That must have been so difficult for you, I said, settling into my role as the concerned fellow victim. How long ago did you work with Maria? There was a pause, just a fraction of a second too long. Oh, it was, let's see, about 2 years ago now. Yes, 2 years. But yesterday, Maria had said it was just last year. The story was already changing. And you're traveling in Europe now? How exciting. Where are you calling from? Another pause. I'm in Paris. Beautiful city. I just saw the Eiffel Tower yesterday. The connection was crystal clear, no international static, no delay, nothing that suggested she was actually calling from Europe. What time is it there? I asked innocently. It's evening here. Late evening. I checked my clock. It was 3 p.m. in Portland, which meant it would be midnight in Paris. Possible, but unlikely that someone would be making casual phone calls at that hour. Mrs. Chen, would you mind if I asked you some specific questions about the process? I'm a little nervous about making such a big change. Of course, dear. What would you like to know? Well, Maria mentioned that my money would be managed by Pacific Wealth Management. Did they handle your investments too? Oh yes, they're wonderful. Very professional, very professional. She'd repeated herself. And she'd avoided giving any specific details about the company. What kind of returns have you seen on your investments? Excellent returns. Very good. Much better than I was getting before. Still no specifics. I decided to push harder. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen, but I'm having trouble hearing you clearly. Are you on a cell phone? Yes, the connection here in Europe isn't always perfect. Could you call me back from a landline? Or maybe we could arrange to speak again when you're in a better location. There was muffled conversation in the background, someone coaching her, telling her what to say. I'm sorry, dear, but I'm leaving Paris tomorrow morning and I'll be traveling for the next few weeks. This might be our only chance to talk. Convenient. I was dealing with someone who would be conveniently unavailable for follow-up questions. Of course, I understand. Could you tell me about the senior community where you lived? I'd love to know what it was like. Oh, it was very nice. Very clean. Good food. The staff they took good care of everyone. Generic descriptions that could apply to any care facility. Nothing specific, nothing personal, nothing that suggested she'd actually lived anywhere. What was your favorite thing about living there? The activities. They had many activities. I was talking to someone reading from a script, someone who'd never been to Sacramento, never lived in a senior community, and was almost certainly calling from somewhere in Portland. Mrs. Chen, this might sound strange, but could you tell me what the weather was like in Sacramento when you lived there? I'm originally from California, and I'm curious about the climate.